Second to last event of the PGA Tour season. I intentionally said second to last because the word penultimate is potentially overused. Not going to lie. We're ignoring it for today. Second to last event of the FedEx Cup playoffs, the BMW Championship coming up this weekend. Brandon has already done it this podcast. We're not even a minute in. I am psyched about that. We're going to break things down from a DFS perspective and get you ready for the BMW Championship on FanDuel for this week. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Saunas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. And are you ready to quit? Like you look done. What has caused this angst a minute and 32 seconds into the recording?
How's it overused? You get to use it one time a year.
No, you don't. Not everything. Everything has a penultimate. I was watching Better Call Saul. They had the penultimate episode last week. Every no spoilers. Everything had like the word penultimate in the podcast title. Mm-hmm. Everywhere you look, the word penultimate is there, and I'm sick of it. I'm fighting back against big penultimate.
Do you get this annoyed with final?
Yes. Next week, I'm boycotting that word.
Next week, you're not going to say the final PGA. You're going to say...
I'm boycotting. I will not say that word once. If I do say the word final, you owe me $5 because you incepted it in my brain and it's your fault.
Man, I feel like... I hope I remember that we said this because I know you won't.
Yeah, there's no shot. I'm going to forget about this.
So I might have a similar outburst next week if I remember that. And because you're going to say it.
You'd never have an outburst. Another thing that may give you an outburst is last week I was not on the show, but you did Slack me and ask me if I had any win picks for the show. I said I wanted Will Zalatoris and some other scrub. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. And in our yearly contest, we have our bobblehead. You've already won that. I owe you a hat at some point because you beat me in the bobblehead, our weekly head-to-head for PGA DFS. But we also do win picks at the end relative to odds at FanDuel Sportsbook. And Will Zalatoris' win is put me ahead, which means I am bound for an epic collapse of some kind because success is not allowed. But Will Z, because you asked me for my pick, because I would have forgotten, again, back to that, it's your fault again. So you're going to win anyway, but like, how do you feel right now knowing that you have to be nervous for 2 weeks, whereas otherwise you wouldn't have?
Well, as they say, golf is the gentleman's game. And I feel like our golf adjacent, contests that we do, we should be gentlemen about it. So I feel like in the spirit of everything, I did things, by the unwritten book. I think that's what I think that's what the golf greats would have expected from me. So
Jack Nicklaus is just smiling upon you.
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 weeks left to hit a winner at the end of the show, and have you not? Of course, look, we're being gentlemen, so I won't bring up the fact that back in the day you won this contest by selecting Dustin Johnson.
Different rules. We were not going based on FanDuel
select the same golfer, and he started with a 10-shot lead over last place in a 30-person tournament. He ended up cementing you the victory. So I won't bring that up because I am a gentleman.
Sure, you would never do that. I won last year too, though, because it's Xander Schauffele. So let's not totally.
Was it an eagle on the last hole?
It was something like that,
like 17th, 18th. I don't know.
Yeah. What are our units overall for this year between the two of us? Do you have that pulled up right now for our win bets?
I can get it in 1 second. It was, I think you're up 29.5 units. I'm up 25 units.
I'll take
on
that.
Just the 2 win bets, assuming one unit each, obviously.
We've had a good year. That's pretty good.
We have, yeah. And it's also tough because we don't specifically, we don't specifically choose golfers always at you do this more than I do. I try to hit winners, which sounds like the most obvious thing, but like I go a lot chalkier for this because I'm just trying to secure some units. I'm not risking it with 100 to 1 long shots, but by the way, 100 to 1, 80 to 1 sounds great. But if those guys don't win, it doesn't matter. So
still a zero.
a lot of chalky winners this year, and I think that we're probably going to stick with that this week, but also just kind of in the near future because golf's pretty deep. And this week in particular, a lot of golfers listed at short odds.
So speaking of the odds, we did have you on covering the spread, our betting podcast, which is now daily. So you can find Brandon's full list of PGA bets he likes this week on covering the spread. Find that wherever you get your podcasts. It was the Tuesday show with Brandon, and then Pitching Ninja, Rob Freeman, getting his K-props for the day. But let's dig into the DFS side of things here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast. We can talk about this BMW Championship because it's at a new course. It is at Wilmington Country Club, the South Course. It is 534 yards in a par 71. And this is the first time they've been there. There are 68 golfers in the field, so it's a no-cut event. 68 after the Cam Smith withdrawal yesterday. The top 30 in the FedEx Cup playoffs after this week will advance to the Tour Championship. So you would think it'd be motivation for the guys on the fringes, but also positioning matters a lot. So motivation is sky high for everybody in this field to put themselves, not just to qualify for next week, but to also put themselves in a good position for next week. So motivation is very high, but new course. So Brandon, what do we need to know about Wilmington Country Club in terms of what we should care about for this week?
Yeah, so it's long especially for being a par 71. It's about 220 yards longer than the average par 71, but it also is pretty narrow. So you have to kind of figure out how to blend those two things. For me, it's going to be the distance that ultimately wins out. We have some long holes on the course this week. 2 of the 3 par 5s longer than 630 yards. The other's 582, which is still longer than the average par 5, which is around 560 yards on the PGA Tour. So all the par 5s are long. We got 3 of the 11 par 4s being long, at least 490 yards. It's about 50, 60 yards longer than the average par 4. So we're getting added distance on virtually, substantially added distance, I should say, on about 6 or 7 holes. So it's not just necessarily 1 or 2 holes that really kind of changes things. So I think it's pretty relevant for this week that the golfers are long off the tee, despite some thick rough and despite some, what look like narrow fairways. And if we look at similar courses, so longer ones, but that do have sort of narrower fairways and thick rough, distance is actually still more important than accuracy. And, we're going to be looking at a lot of long approaches for this week. Data Golf's course table, course fit tool, they have expected dispersion of approach shots, so like second shots, and everyone's getting an abnormally high number of approaches from over 200 yards. You can look at proximity from 200 yards. You can look at, whatever 200 plus yard stat you kind of want, but it does correlate pretty heavily with driving distance and actually strokes gained off the tee, because, it just makes sense that those, when you're getting fairway woods in your hands, it's not that different than driving distance. So I think that it's going to be crucial that golfers can pick up distance on the field. All that said, we do have big greens, and that typically de-emphasizes approach play. But if I go back to the course comps, a lot of courses that should set up similar to this actually reward just overall ball striking. So effectively driving distance and iron play. So for me, I'm looking at ball strikers this week. That's going to be put us on a lot of our heat check favorites. And the other kind of key stat that you really factor in is potentially lag putting, but just overall putting, because we're going to have longer putts than normal because the greens are so big. So you can complicate it and say I need proximity from 175 plus and weight it this way, but ultimately I'm looking at driving distance, strokes gained off the tee, strokes gained approach, and putting for the week.
Do you care about finding golfers who are both long and accurate because of the stuff you mentioned with the longer roughs? Are you looking specifically at guys, or like not specifically at guys, but do you give a boost to guys who can kind of live in both areas?
So, I mean, anytime that comes up, Xander Schauffele comes to mind, and yeah. I am pretty high on Xander for this week. But you can also look at someone like Rory. For as long as he is, he's not that inaccurate.
Sure.
Scotty Scheffler, also not that inaccurate. Jon Rahm's actually quite accurate for as long as he is. So I think it's less about that specifically, and it's more that I'm not looking at just the absolute longest hitters in the field and bumping them up a ton, because there's more to this course than that. So like Wyndham Clark, Trey Mullinax, like I need to see a little bit more from their overall games. So there are some courses where you just say whoever hits it farthest, I think, gets a huge leg up. I think it's going to be a much more difficult test than that this week, and with the field being what it is. So that kind of answers your question. But yeah, again, it's never bad to be long and pretty straight. So I think that I don't know. I don't know why Jon Rahm is getting bet down just to kind of jump ahead. Seems like he's getting a lot of attention. He did kind of jump out to me a little bit. But I think that ultimately we're going to have an overall test this week. And I guess it should favor Jon Rahm if Jon Rahm's back to being, Jon Rahm.
Yeah, Rahm played well last week. I'm not sure if it's just that's kind of driving things, but we'll talk about Rahm, guys who shortened, guys in good form, and much more in just 1 second. But first, NFL kickoff is still a few weeks away, but you can get in on the action now on FanDuel Sportsbook with their NFL Super Win bonus. Right now, anyone who places at least a $50 Super Bowl winner bet will get $5 back for each win their team has during the regular season. There are also a ton of other futures markets available, like team win totals, division winners, player props, and so many more. There's no better place to get ready for the football season than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states only. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable free bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Max free bet $50. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Louisiana, 1-877-770-STOP. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Tennessee, call the Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. In Wyoming, 1-800-522-4700, or in West Virginia, 1-800-GAMBLER.net. No course history to discuss here, of course, because it is a new course. So let's dive into current form and talk about some golfers who've been popping recently. Brandon, you're looking at the Data Golf leaderboard recently. When you dig into the stats, see who has excelled of late, who stands out to you there?
Yeah, so with the Data Golf True Strokes Gained query, I know for any longtime listeners, we're going to mix this up because I think it's more helpful that we discuss course form a little, or current form a little more better, maybe.
A little more better.
But over the past 3 months, Rory McIlroy is gaining 2.91 strokes per round. And that adjusts for field strength. So a 2.91 for Rory. Tony Finau next up at a 2.74. Matt Fitzpatrick, 2.54. Xander Schauffele, 2.47. So let's just say Rory, Finau, Fitz, Schauffele, 2.5 or better. Nobody else is above a 2 aside from Zalatoris at a 2.1. So if you want to look at the 4 guys who are in the best form relative to the field, that's Rory, Finau, Fitzpatrick, and Xander. I think that's pretty interesting because we know that Rory is the big favorite. Finau's been getting the wins. Fitzpatrick, obviously, and Xander too, getting some wins, some big wins in that time frame. But it's a pretty big teardrop, and that's not necessarily reflected in the win odds. It's a little bit more flat than that. So I think that's appealing for this week. And then someone who also jumps out to me as I was looking at this is Patrick Cantley. Well, I guess 2 guys in particular, because just below Zalatoris at a 2.1, we have Patrick Cantley at a 1.97 and Scotty Scheffler at a 1.92, but they're doing it in very different ways. Scheffler's at a 2.1 in terms of tee to green, Cantley a 1.1, and he's actually gaining 0.84 strokes per event with putting. Now, Rory's up there with a putter too, but Cantley still relevant, but doing a lot with the putter. Scheffler actually is the only guy in like the top 20 in total strokes gained who's losing long-term in this sample with the putter. So I think that this is a perfect example where I probably wouldn't have talked about Scotty Scheffler's current form necessarily because the finishing positions haven't necessarily jumped out, but he's phenomenal right now. Tee to green, He is as good as Rory, Finau, and Fitzpatrick tee to green. He just isn't putting well. And I think that he's a really fascinating name for this week. So does anything jump out to you from those names or looking at this in general?
Well, lucky for us, we have a guy who looks at putting regression stats on the show. His name is Brandon. Not sure if you've heard of him. Anyway, you look at putting regression. You dig into which putting stats are predictive. What do those numbers say about Scheffler right now? Because I have a lot of interest in Scotty Scheffler, and you look at that negative 0.21 putting the past 3 months. That's gross, but also it's like, I know long-term Scotty Scheffler is not a lights-out putter, but he's also not hideous. So are we looking at some potential regression incoming here for Scheffler, or what are you seeing?
So I actually think this is more regression finally meeting up to Scotty Scheffler because he had been someone who had been overperforming for quite some time. He's actually still kind of overperforming over his past 50 rounds. This sample here for Scheffler is only about 30 rounds, but from inside 5 feet, he's not particularly good. He's a 10th percentile putter there. He's actually a 94th percentile lag putter and a 33rd percentile expected putter relative to this field. So if you want lag putting, it seems like Scheffler has that. It's kind of stands out because watching him when he's at his peak, he's getting up and down, he's saving par, he's knocking these long putts to tap in distance. But the underlying data for Scotty Scheffler with the putter has actually been something that got me less interested in Scheffler than I would typically for a world number one who is a great ball striker. I will say that's also kind of caused me to miss out on the recent Tony Finau wins because he's done a lot of damage with the lag putting, and I'm okay missing out on that because the long-term data says that that's not necessarily what you want to see. By comparison, Rory McIlroy gives us the same tee to green game, but he's gaining almost 0.8 shots per round with the putter, and it's supported by underlying data. So if I'm looking at Rory versus Scheffler, like for this week, I don't really see them particularly close. And so that's kind of why I've been a little bit lower on Scheffler than most. But again, like you said, he's not a bad putter.
Yeah.
But the underlying data is not particularly appealing right now either.
Yeah. I don't know. I want to buy in. I was on him last week. I'm grateful that our head-to-head was already dust because I still did one against you, but I had Scheffler in it, and it was quite bad. So thankful that was the case. I am still tempted by Scheffler and find him very interesting for tournaments. I think that the distinction is for tournaments there because for cash games, your putting numbers are stuff I trust. So I don't want to bet on regression there when the stuff you were discussing probably means that it's probably going to be bad for a bit. But for tournaments, I'm okay banking on the ball striking. He is still elite there. So I think for tournaments, Scheffler's still very interesting. Let's dig into what the bookmakers are saying for this week. Rory McIlroy is a favorite. He is 10-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook. John Rahm next up at 12-1 before a whole lot of dudes are 14-1. Those guys are Patrick Cantley, Matthew Fitzpatrick, Justin Thomas, and Scotty Scheffler. We got Will Zalatoris and Tony Finau both 16-1, while Colin Murakawa is 18-1. Xander Schauffele and Sam Burns right at the top group, both sitting at 20-1. Now, I think the thing that stood out to me here, Brandon, is we don't have clearly defined tiers. Typically, we'll see like, oh, we got 5 guys who are shorter than 14-1, blah, 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 and there'll be like teardrops. We don't really get that. It's more like steps. Step down, step down, step down, step down for this week. Are you getting the same impression? And if so, how does that shift your approach for DFS?
Yeah, so this is more of a major caliber field, and it's kind of reflected in the odds. But it's also important to remember that this is a no-cut event, and so it should be inherently less volatile than cutting out some guys who just get off to slow starts, have one bad round, potentially 2, but for these guys, probably one bad round that just isn't good enough with the other round to get them through the cut. So we're looking at less volatility, and in no-cut events, usually no-cut events have good fields. So that's part of it. But usually in the no-cut events, we see strong winners, guys with good all-around games who can just elevate and get hot in one area and have a good overall game, along with that. So I do see it pretty similarly in terms of my win model. I will say that Rory is a bit of a standout at 9.5% with Scotty Scheffler at 6.1%. He's still up there. It's not like we can't consider Scheffler by any means, but it's a bit more gradual from there. And honestly, if I sort my spreadsheet by golfers with win odds of 27-1 or shorter on FanDuel Sportsbook, basically it's just a gradual decline. The one outlier is Colin Murakawa, who's typically a little overvalued because he does convert wins at a pretty high rate. I don't know if he has the distance this week. I really considered him last week because it was a better setup for him. I didn't quite get there because the all-around game just pretty bad. If you look at like some break even, I probably shouldn't say that, like some stabilization points for ball striking and around or short game, he's actually one of the worst players in the field currently. If we look at like the smallest samples that we can trust. So I'm probably not going to get there with Morikawa, but yeah, it's a pretty gradual decline from there, from the top. So that does let me think that I can differentiate from Rory, who's going to be chalk if I'm talking tournaments. I mean, I love Rory for cash games, but in terms of tournaments, they're just naturally going to be out of the top like 12. A couple guys who are kind of drastically underappreciated this week, and the data really says that we should be okay just going with them.
One other takeaway from that could be, and you mentioned this in regards to it being kind of like a major-esque field, is that we could go towards a more balanced approach. Now, that's a bit counterthetical to like the way people think of a no-cut event. They think, okay, we can be more top-heavy because we guarantee to have 6 of 6. How do you view that distribution for this week, given the way the win odds break down, but also considering what your thoughts are of the 8,000 range for this week?
Yeah, so I've actually done some research on like optimal lineups and looking at tougher events. I think I have specifically no cut events in there. It's been probably like 2 or 3 years since I've actually done that. But what no cut events, what tougher events actually say is to go more balanced. I think the no cut event angle of, well, I can play anybody and they're going to give me 4 rounds. What you're actually saying this, like, let's take this week in particular. Like, yeah, I'm guaranteeing 4 rounds of my golfers, barring a withdrawal. But you're getting 4 rounds guaranteed of worse play from golfers who are going to have a hard time making up ground on the rest of the field. And so, yes, if you hit on the 1 or 2 values who really pop, you're in a great situation, but you're still looking at always like half of the field being a tier below, like the guys who really can make a difference. And you're willingly accepting then 8 rounds, like let's say you play 2 value guys, you're getting 8 rounds of like very subpar play.
Yeah.
And like that's actually like that's worse than in a no cut event, because you're actually just hoping for volatility that they make the cut and some other higher rostered players miss the cut. The high rostered players aren't going to miss the cut this week. And if Rory McIlroy was high rostered and he doesn't win over 4 rounds, he's probably still going to finish like top 20 at worst. I know that it can be worse than that, but so yeah, in no-cut events, definitely don't get careless with the bottom of your lineup by any means.
Yeah, I think that for me, it's like I view it in terms of like anchors. How many guys, and anchors, not a positive sense here, how many guys are going to drag my lineups down? I don't want that to be 3 guys who are putting a lid on the upside of my lineup. So I might be willing to take a shot at one guy I wouldn't typically use. I think that's the way I view it. One guy who has a lower salary, I can say Mito Pereira for this week. I feel fine spoiling that. Like, he's 82. Like, I think Mito would be fine in like a cut event, but like for this week specifically, love it. I think that approach works. I don't want to bog myself down with 3 guys who don't have win juice in order to jam in a bunch of guys who do. I think that's the distinction for me personally. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm drawn into Kurt Kitayama at minimum salary because he's long off the tee. His irons are about field average, and in a no-cut event at a full 7,000, that's appealing. But I would not necessarily do that if it were last week, whenever there was a cut.
Yeah, I think he's got some juice. Okay. All right, we'll talk about Kitayama later on. You mentioned Jon Rahm was getting some steam. You said that he had been bet down 12-1. He was 15th. Let's talk about other golfers whose odds have shifted. Obviously, there have been some shifts because of the Cam Smith withdrawal, but like overall, whose odds have shifted most notably since things opened?
Yeah, hope Cam's, I think, hip was. I hope he's
I'm sure he's hobbling around. Prayers up for Cam Smith. Quick recovery, buddy.
I will feel bad if he actually has
correct
a legitimate injury, but I
it was really just the Jennifer Lawrence, okay, sure, buddy, gif when that happened.
Yeah, so these numbers actually come from before the Cam Smith withdrawal, which I guess also kind of gives me some context as to how they were initially valued. But Rory from 11 to 10, I think is still noteworthy. As you mentioned, Jon Rahm, 15 to 12. A trio with Matt Fitzpatrick, Justin Thomas, and Scotty Scheffler all shortened from 16 to 1 to 14 to 1. Colin Murakawa, 21 to 18. Sungjae Im, similar mold to Colin Murakawa, 27 to 22. I kind of like Sungjae, but I don't know if it's the best fit for him. Joaquin Niemann, 45 to 34. Presumably you're also in on Niemann because we tend to always be in on Niemann, but
yeah.
And then Mav McNeely, 120 to 80, I thought was noteworthy just because the field is what it is. But those are the most notable golfers whose odds have actually shortened.
I'm pretty sure I had Niemann in my head-to-head last week. I'm not entirely sure because I didn't have time to talk through it, so I don't know as much there, but I'm pretty sure Niemann was in there for me. I don't mind. He's 96 this week. I was tinkering with a head-to-head lineup, and I have him in there. I think Niemann is pretty interesting once again for this week. So those are the guys who have shortened. That's noteworthy, obviously, because it means there's been some interest of some kind. I think lengthening this week might be a bigger red flag than usual because of the Cam Smith news. So which golfers' odds have lengthened at FanDuel Sportsbook?
Yeah, I'm actually then going to mention some golfers whose odds have stayed the same because it's almost
that's true.
problematic. Yeah. But just the lengtheners, Tom Kim, 31 to 33, Jordan Spieth, 31 to 34, Shane Lowry, 34 to 41. I thought, I guess the Lowry phase is kind of done. Hideki and Billy Horschel, 45 to 50. Trey Mullen, as I mentioned, I thought he'd get a little bit of buzz because he just nukes it, but 80 to 100. So that was noteworthy. But if we look at what's a little bit more relevant at the top, golfers whose odds did not change or maybe changed and reverted back to where they were, Will Zalatoris and Tony Finau, both 16 to 1. Xander Schauffele, 20. Victor Hovland, 27. I know Xander did shorten temporarily to at least 19, but he went back to 20. So some recent winners, Zalatoris, Finau, Schauffele, I guess if you still consider Xander's wins recent, did not actually shorten despite the Cam Smith withdrawal. So I think that's pretty noteworthy to say the least.
For sure. Going back to the guys who lengthened, Hideki, 45 to 50, obviously the withdrawal last week, but he's in the field this week. Are you interested at all in Hideki, or do the injury concerns push you away here?
I think you could make a case that if Hideki plays and is healthy, he could be a very key differentiator because people will be scared off. But I also can very easily make the case that other golfers have Hideki's current upside and won't be a risk of literally, we're talking about anchors. One way to anchor down a lineup is to have someone withdraw in a no-cut event. So I guess maybe scared money don't make money, but
I hate that phrase. Oh my gosh. People use it for betting and they're like, scared money don't make no money. And I'm like, losing bets also don't make no money either.
Yeah.
So let's not,
Yeah, be responsible. I've like never been, that's just me because I'm
just
kind of
people
robotic,
bother me. I was doing like
is that my sound clip?
Yeah, sorry. Pretty clearly, yes.
But yeah, I've always I've never really found myself tempted to bet something that I have actively don't see value on.
Stupid phrase. You hit like a very specific chord for me there.
I can tell. Speaking of though, Morikawa, he leads the field in fan share tags, which I guess makes some sense because he had a good showing last week with the T5 where he putted well. Again, I was almost going to talk myself into Morikawa, but he gained a ton of fairways on the field. which is helpful, but it was more helpful last week than I think it will be this week. So I would just caution against that a little bit. And if we can get Murakawa to be a bit chalky and be able to avoid it, like I'm not saying that Murakawa has no chance. We actually can sometimes see shorter hitters play well at longer courses, because if it's too long for everyone, then it doesn't actually matter. I just don't see how having a distance advantage on, like a 490 yard par 4 isn't helpful, because the longest guys who can hit it 350, that's actually, going to be an advantage. So I'm surprised. Do you see enough with Murakawa that he would be like the most prominent DFS target?
Nope. It could be like a salary related thing, maybe, because he's 10-6 on FanDuel. I'm not sure what he is on Redacted, but like
his portion of salary cap is lower on FanDuel than it is other places.
Okay, so like, yeah, it's not even that. I don't know. I don't know. I don't see it personally.
It's probably chasing last week.
That could be it. Yeah. That's about the only pitch I've got personally. Yeah. Which lower salary golfers have stayed out to you?
Aaron Wise, our guy. I don't know if he's going to be my guy this week, but 55-1.
I think he could be your guy. I think that's fair.
Salary of 9,000. This week?
There are worse guys quote unquote guys to have.
Oh, this week, yeah, there are worse guys to have, but I think that for him, the long-term form is not strong enough to feel like he should be at a salary of 9,000. Statistically, like
could be unwise. Fade wise.
He's got decent stats, but if I look at like overall long-term form, it's not good enough. Taylor Pendrith, Cam Davis, I like a good bit this week, 65-1. Same as Davis Riley, 65-1. Brian Harman, 75-1. Again, I'm not sold that this is a great fit for him. Sahith Theegala, Keegan Bradley, Mav McNeely, 80-1. Same as Keith Mitchell, who's pretty long off the tee. And then JT Poston, been golfing well, 95-1. Don't know if it's a Poston week with his distance being what is in his irons.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. There are some guys on the list though who I like. Cam Davis specifically, spreadsheet ruiner, secret spreadsheet ruiner. Cam Davis, Cameron Davis. Does he interest you at 89?
Yes, he is one of my player picks. Kind of a boomer bust play. I'll talk more about him in detail, but the kind of guy who has upside at a course where distance can really help you separate. He's not the only one. Like Taylor Pendrith also kind of fits that. I was going back and forth between them. But yeah, it's a matter of, again, I said like distance alone is not enough, but distance with some pop, some pulse in other places is appealing. And so for me, Cam Davis, he's got 52nd percentile irons. That's very different than someone like a Keith Mitchell with 12th percentile irons, or Trey Mullinax with the 4th percentile, or Wyndham Clark with 1st percentile. So Cam Davis, I think, does enough. And it sounds like we're both going to be on him. He might be a head-to-head play.
Currently in mine. I'll say that.
I think he might be for me.
So, yeah. Okay. We're going to dig into weather in a second. But first, we got a question on YouTube from Deacon to the Legend talking about how to build things in single entry. And I think this is actually a good talking point, specifically for this week, because I think single entry for no-cut events is the best. It's the best always. But he was asking, or they were asking, I should say, do you build more of a cash game lineup with a couple differentiations, or is it a mixture of value and low roster plays the way to go? For me personally, I want to answer this one first. For me personally, for single entry, I want to identify who will be the golfer who is going to be the person people think they can't fade. I want to play into the FOMO that others may have and try to use that to my advantage. So for me, I want to look at a slate and be like, okay, people are going to say, I can't fade Rory McIlroy because he is the cash game play for this week. I think that you kind of just look at what you would do for a cash game and identify who is going to be the runaway chalk and feel more freedom to pivot from that. So for me, for single entry, I actually feel I get more contrarian in single entry than I do even in like multi-entry tournaments. That might be stupid, but because I feel like it's easier to pivot in those formats, especially in a field like this where I have really good pivots for me. So I think for me, I definitely don't go with a cash game lineup because it's skewed, because the payout structure is very different. I just want to be different without being dumb. That's my mindset always for tournaments, but I think specifically for single entry, that's the way I want to play things. Brandon, what about for you? And if you want to spin it specifically to this week, how are you thinking about things for single entry on FanDuel?
Yeah, so a lot of people I think have the tendency to throw their cash game lineup into single entry because they're saying, well, I don't have to compete against these really like contrarian off the wall sort of lineup constructions in a multi-entry tournament. But like you said, I don't necessarily love that approach. I think you have to get a little bit different from just a straight up like who's got the hot. We don't say floor really on this show. I don't want to send Jim into another spot.
I got you. I saw the banner that says "ignore the floor" over here on the YouTube stream, so I got it back up. You're good.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Rory, potentially, I guess Murakawa, maybe, like the guys who probably wind up being the most popular, and so it's always specific to the particular week. Because if it was like Rory, and then the second best golfer in the field was like Billy Horschel or something, it's like, okay,
that's different. Yeah,
that's a bit different, but. You can have Scotty Scheffler, John Rahm, not Cam Smith. Get well soon, Cam. But yeah, the pivoting away from the absolute chalk to someone who is very, very similar in terms of projected outcomes is very real this week. And so I think the safest thing to do is build a cash game-esque lineup. You don't have to play everyone at 10% raw, like figure out who the most off the wall plays are by any means. So I'm probably a little bit safer than what Jim was saying, where I definitely get more unique in multi-entry because I will. Kurt Kitayama is probably a good example. I don't think I'll play him in a single entry. I would play him when I had more lineups to try to get to, because I don't have to be that different in a single entry. So it's kind of in the middle for me. But if I said like cash games here and GP like multi-entries here, I'm going to be closer to the multi-entry like tournament lineup mindset than I am just a straight cash game lineup for a single entry.
Other thing I would say for you, Deacon, is if you're entering multiple single entry contests, use different lineups. That's the other way to get like multi-entries is, I mean, obviously like we can't multi-account. That's very against the rules. Don't do that. But like, let's say you're in a $5 single entry and a $25 single entry, use different lineups because you're kind of giving yourself more routes there. I would probably advocate for that, 3 entry tournaments, stuff like that. Those are awesome. So tailor it towards the actual tournament you were in. Be different without being dumb. That's always kind of my like headliner for this kind of contest. And enter different single entry lineups into different single entry events. I think that's the way, the key things for single entry. It's the best contest type, Deacon. So hopefully those go well for you. And hopefully that does help answer your question there. Weather for this week is very calm. I got nothing. The wind will increase during the day, both Thursday and Friday, but it's the same pattern both days. Wind won't get above 8 miles per hour either those days or over the weekend. So great time for some golf. I think that's the biggest takeaway. So we can just dive in to our player picks for this week based on the salaries at FanDuel.com. Brandon, in the stud tier, who are you focusing on for this week?
It's going to be Rory. He's only T8 in tags on FanShare, which is a little surprising to me.
I don't think that means he'll be 8th in roster rate, but yeah, it's a little weird.
I guess the missed cut last week is enough. 1 missed cut, 2 rounds of data, and we know who Rory McIlroy is. It's not 2 rounds of data is not predictive for anyone, but especially for someone who's been in the form as that Rory McIlroy's been in. Last time he missed the cut was the Valero Texas Open, and then was runner-up at the Masters. So I think he could probably bounce back a little bit. But yeah, I think Rory he's the best play of the week in terms of both upside and, I don't know, Jim, what word to use, but like top 10 like floor odds. No one's really particularly close.
Stop saying that word. I would say median outcome, best median outcome, best 90, best ceiling. Like, I don't know.
Okay.
That work?
I guess. But yeah, if all indications are that distance and iron play are going to help separate. Historically, no cut events have favored using like a higher percentage of your salary cap on FanDuel than a weaker field or an event with a cut, because winners typically have a higher average salary in these like stronger field no cut events than they do at other events where there are more chances for these guys to win. So that's going to mean we want more balance. And yes, starting a lineup with Rory kind of by default means you're going to be the least amount of balance that you can be with anyone else. But Rory's salary is not prohibitive by any means, and I think that there are a lot of ways to build around Rory and still be different. So if you're dead set on having Rory in your lineup, even in a single entry or multi-entry, you can differentiate in other ways, because Rory plus someone else can have give you a very unique spin versus Rory plus whatever chalk value pops up by Thursday.
And I do think that based on the fan share tags, we can't say Rory will be under rostered, but I think we can say he won't be the person I'd pivot from in a single entry. I think that's kind of the impression that I'm getting, where I can still feel good about him in single entry. And he is my top player pick as well. It's a distance week. We want good ball striking. We need birdies. It's just, that's a Rory week to me. He did miss a cut last week, but not a disaster. He struggled with his accuracy off the tee, and he was pretty rough on the greens, but the approach play was still sick. He leads the field in true strokes gained the past 6 months, got a big gap over third place there. I think it's a bounce back week. I think that if I'm trying to differentiate in single entry, it'd be with, probably either JT or Scotty Scheffler. The problem is that JT is also pretty high in fan share tags. So I think Scheffler might be like the differentiation piece for a single entry lineup. The problem is, like you said, the putting is not fluky in it being bad, and that does matter. So I still think like a Rory works for single entry. I might go to Scheffler as my number 2. I think that could be the way I'd want to differentiate, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. Who else do you like here in this upper range?
So I had JT.
Live pivot?
I think I'm going to go with Xander, because 500 goes a long way.
Okay.
I wanted to shout out how good JT's spike week rates have been. I think he's a great play, but if he is going to be a bit popular, then I'm fine with Xander, who is one of the guys whenever we want distance but also accuracy. So he's probably not going to get himself into massive trouble off the tee. He's one of the best iron players in the field, and he's also one of the best putters in the field, and it's always supported by good underlying data. Xander also is just like eternally sort of a putting regression candidate in the positive sense, because even though he's a good putter, he should actually be better. Doesn't necessarily have the best like success on lag putting. That's not necessarily like to say that he's not a good lag putter. He's got a very nice score of being in the 69th percentile on lag putting over the past 50 rounds. So I think that there's a lot to like about Xander.
Yeah, I think that he is interesting to me as well. I think that he is intriguing just to, like as a guy, not just in terms of like what he brings, but also in terms of roster construction. He's 10-7. That's a pretty good number because you get a lot of win equity for a low salary. I like that. But I also, for the same reason, like Tony Finau. He's my second win pickup here. He finished 5th last week. So clearly Finau's run is dust. He's trash. We can never count on him again. But I do like him for this week. He ranks 3rd in the field in approach the past 50 rounds per Fantasy National, 17th in distance, and 10th in birdies or better gained. Bentgrass is Finau's best putting surface. The ball striking, phenomenal the past 3 months. He's 11,000. And similar to the thing we were discussing with Xander is we get a lot of win equity for 11,000. And I like that a lot. What's your read on Finau for this week?
Yeah, so I mentioned Finau as someone who, like, if you just say, okay, give me distance off the tee, he's got that. Although he hasn't been as long off the tee as he can be, which is nice to see that he's probably dialing it back with purpose. Yeah. He's one of the best iron players in the field, 94th percentile there long term. And the thing that really always makes it difficult with Finau for me lately is that since I've looked into the putting regression numbers, he's been like a guy who should be much worse with the putter than he is. He is 9th percentile from within 15 feet, which is kind of the like bankable, makeable range where you can have some say over it. Even more specifically, 18th percentile from within 5 feet, and 12th percentile from 5 to 10. However, he's a 99th percentile lag putter, makes a lot of bombs. And then once I saw the data, I thought back and I was like, yeah, I kind of feel like I see Tony Finau making a lot of long putts. It's partially a skill. We're probably going to need it this week. Good lag putting, but if I wasn't focused on that, I'd say he's a great play. I just think that maybe there are slightly better plays at similar salaries.
Okay, let's dive into the mid-range now. Who is popping for you around the 9 to 10,000 range? I'm saying around because I'm breaking the rules with my first pick, but who's your first pick here?
Well, it's also like usually we just do like 91 to 10,000 for this, but that's like 7 golfers this week.
That's true. I don't feel as bad.
But I feel pretty good with both of the guys that I am pinpointing. They're not just obligation names to throw out there, but Joaquin Niemann at 96 doesn't necessarily jump off the page as someone who we would think of as being long off the tee, but he's long enough. 66th percentile there. He's got good iron play, 70th percentile. And I always end up targeting Niemann more on bent grass greens where he's got good numbers there. And he's good on par fives because of the length and the iron play. So for me, Niemann is someone I would be considering building around in very balanced lineups. Like, let's say I maybe start my lineup with like Justin Thomas, or really try to see what it looks like if I start it with Xander. And go with Niemann. So like a Xander Niemann start gets me 99.25 for 4 golfers. I would love it more if I was enamored with the upper 9s and low 10s. It's not like I dislike them, but they don't necessarily stand out to me at salary substantially. But I could see the case for that this week because you then get 6 golfers who are pretty stellar and 4 guaranteed rounds of all of them. That actually fits like the historic no-cut optimal lineup approach pretty well.
Yeah, the guys in the upper 9s, Tom Kim, you mentioned that his odds have lengthened a bit. He's 98. Hideki's 99. Billy Horschel, not a distance guy, he's 97. I agree with your sentiment that the upper 9s are not going to pop. So I think I'll probably navigate around this tier with Niemann being like the stop for gas in the tier and kind of the move on from there. I think he's kind of the one guy, which is in part why I decided to break the rules with Victor Hovland being my top mid-range guy. He's 10-2, stretching it a bit, but I think it's worthwhile because he ranks 4th in the field in approach, 26th in distance, 15th in birdies or better game the past 50 rounds. He had a rough stretch a couple events ago, but both the Open and the St. Jude were both very good for Hovland. He's 10-2. I like Hovland quite a bit for the win juice he brings. What's your rating on Victor Hovland this week?
So if I look at my stats only model, Hovland's 6th in the field, partially because I have basically no weight on around the green, and he's the worst around the green player in the field over the past year. But yeah, enough distance with enough accuracy, phenomenal iron player. And actually one of the guys who we probably don't think of as being like a good putter, but he is 91st percentile in putting from within 15 feet, just 25th percentile from 15 feet or longer. So that's a combo of, he's making makeable putts. He's not necessarily making long putts, and that historically says like the putting should improve long term. I like Hovland. Mm-hmm. I just didn't quite get there myself, but if I'm messing around with this balanced lineup, especially if I go with this next guy on our list, who's in both of our lists, Max Homa at 9,300, you can really start, feeling good about every golfer in your lineup as opposed to feeling good about 5 or 6, 4 or 5, I guess.
So, talk to me about Homa then.
So I think that Homa is a lot like Niemann, where you don't really think of him as a long driver, but he is. And he's one of the best, like, all-around golfers, honestly, in the field, if we look at the things that matter. So basically just ignoring around the green play. He's good on par 5s, but he is one of 6 golfers in the field to have a spike week in at least half of his events in terms of tee to green over the past year, and in a third with the putter. It's just a very rare combo. The other 6 included Sungjae Im, so they're now all 22 to 1 or shorter. Home is not really in that like tier in terms of win odds or salary. So I think that Homa is probably under salaried. And so he's going to be a key part of my lineups. He might honestly be my favorite play below like Xander at salary of the week.
I like that. I think I might actually be a little tiny bit lower on you than him based on that, but like in this range, I think he's a standout, massive standout. Someone I really like here. I just think I'm going to probably be in the 9,000 range a lot less than usual. That's the one downside with Homa that I see is I just don't like this range very much. So I might not be here. But when I am here, Homa will be the guy I turn to. Homa and Neiman, I think, are like the only guys in the 9,000 range I really want to use at all this week. So that's kind of where I'm at there. I think he's got a great median outcome, Brandon, but also a solid 90th percentile outcome. We haven't seen the ceiling recently, but I still think it's there. So I think the Homa grades out really well at 93, just not a range I want to be in all that often. So let's talk about the value plays here. Guys at 9,000 or lower, who's popping to you there?
Well, we got more overlap here. Do you want to go first here this time?
Yeah, it's Cameron Davis or Cam, whatever you want. He's got the distance. He can putt on bent grass. I think that's a fun combo for this week. He ranks 12th in distance gain the past 50 rounds. He's 9th in bent grass putting. Irons aren't great, but like you said, they're not awful. He ranks 26th in approach the past 50 rounds, especially for the salary range. That's not too bad. He's rattled off a bunch of good finishes recently, even as the fields have gotten tougher. Some of those were like, I think he had a good finish in the Barracuda, like whatever. But like some good finishes recently as things have gotten tougher, and I do like that. So I like Cam Davis at 89. Any pushback for you on him? I know he's a player pick for you, but what are your thoughts on him?
Yes, I mean, there are reasons to think that it won't go well. Field worst accuracy, and again, this is long rough. That could lead to a long 4 rounds. Not particularly great on par 4s, 3rd percentile there over the past 50 rounds, below average overall short game. But the positives, the reason to think that there's upside here, good bent grass putting, it's very good, 88th percentile, supported with good underlying putting splits based on distance, 81st percentile driving distance, and 52nd percentile irons, as I mentioned before. So like at least average-ish irons plus distance, good putting. If he doesn't get into significant trouble consistently, he is going to do well. If the rough proves too much, then it could go bad. So it's definitely not a lock, but there are no locks here. And that's why I think like once I get past Max Homa, it's a lot of talking yourself into guys being able to do things. Like I like Russell Henley at 91. I don't know if he's long enough to contend, but he should hit like all the fairways and pick up strokes with the approach play. He's also terrible on bent grass, but after Homa, I think it gets pretty dicey.
It does. But Davis, I think, is the best one of them.
Yes.
We have our Ignore the Floor banner. I think I'm going to add in a Locks Don't Exist banner too. You said that with Davis. I agree. There's no such thing as a lock. If someone tells you there's a lock, they're lying to you. So he's not a lock. There's no such thing in betting or DFS. Those don't exist. If they did exist, you wouldn't be able to bet on them. It's just not how it works. So keep that in mind. But good range of outcomes for Cameron Davis. Who else do you like in the value tier this week?
I kind of like Keegan Bradley. Put up the banner again.
Oh no! Lots. No! Are you gonna do it?
What?
Are you gonna do it? Are you talking about his floor, or are we talking about locks don't exist?
Both. It's Keegan. Let's get wild. Good.
No, I don't know. Yeah, the floor definitely ignore the floor with Keegan. I think that's fair, but also locks don't exist. Maybe Keegan doesn't. I don't know. Go ahead.
He's got some good putting splits lately. Good iron play, good distance. And the thing for me with Keegan is the upside. The spike week rates are pretty standoutish among value golfers. I think that can't be understated. While Keegan's best golf is definitely behind him, he has shown up recently in tougher events. It's also like a Northeast situation for Keegan. I think that might be a little bit of an angle here for this week, but I think Keegan at 87 is definitely in play if we're if we're shooting for like top 10 upside here.
You realize that Delaware and Vermont are not close at all?
Is he from Boston? Isn't that his whole thing?
It says Woodstock, Vermont. I don't know if that's near Boston. I live near Boston. I should know this stuff, but I don't. I've been to Vermont. I just don't. Vermont's pretty far away from Boston.
I thought the whole thing was he was like a Boston guy.
I don't know. I mean, like maybe he is like from a sports perspective.
I don't know. Either way, like I've been to Delaware. I live in Pennsylvania. I think that I know a thing or two about the Northeast.
How do you spell Delaware? Is it D-E-L-E or A?
Oh, Jim.
Okay, it's an A. We're good. I don't know. This feels like the birds aren't real kind of segment of PGA DFS. Anyway, I think Keegan's fine. I think I have guys I like more, specifically Cameron Davis and Mito Pereira. Let's start with Mito, down to $8,200 and did get out of his lull a bit last week. That was good. Made the cut. Finished 42nd. That's not ideal, but good ball striking there for Pereira. He is $8,200 this week. The approach was great even when he was missing cuts. I think that's the most encouraging thing with Mito. Just struggled elsewhere. He's not accurate, so that doesn't matter as much this week. We'd like it in our studs to have both, but, you know, I'd rather have distance. So I think he gets a bump there. He's just a good golfer, I think, $8,200. I think Scott Stallings at the same salary is also intriguing. Brandon, any thoughts for you on either Pereira or Stallings for this week?
Mito is an other to consider for me in my helper on numberFire. Like him, he's 14th in my stats only model. Stallings didn't necessarily jump out to me. I think he's fine. Just I don't know if he's gonna. He's fine, I guess. But I'd rather go with Keith Mitchell.
Okay.
Taylor Pendrith as well. Again, very similar profile to Cam Davis. And then I was toying with the idea of Kurt Kitayama with the balanced lineup, but I had, let's call it 4 reasonably salaried golfers, and then I put in Kitayama, and then I had 14,500 for one golfer. So I didn't think that was going to do me much good.
I mean, if you did Kitayama and then just like above,
balanced, that's kind of. I think that. Like, again, we're not advocating living in the 7,000 range. I think that by not having a cut, if you can have a golfer who can make some birdies and like potentially some eagles and score some fantasy points, even if he finishes like 25th, but does so in a very fantasy friendly fashion, and then you have literally minimum salary on one golfer, and then you hit on the right combo of studs, like that is a winning strategy. But we're also, I think what's most important is that we're not saying like play 3 guys in the 7,000 range and load up on
well then you have like you said 14,000 left, so
but
it's a big takeaway, I think, given the perception of no cut events. Okay, let's finish up here with win picks this week. Because there are only 2 weeks left, I could be a bad person and try to block you with my picks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to message you my win picks for this week before you say yours. And that way, you know, I'm not tailoring them based on what you pick. Don't look at my message yet. But like, okay, I just sent you my picks. So you know that I'm not cheating and trying to block you. But who are your win picks for this week based on the current win odds at FanDuel Sportsbook?
So it's honestly a little tough because I now have to guess who you're going to guess.
I mean, that's on me. I told you one before the show, so you know I'm picking Rory.
Yes,
and I'm okay with you knowing that,
which I would have done myself.
You still could.
I could, but then I'm guaranteeing that I can pick next week's winner. But then you're just going to pick whoever's first and second. So
I'm still picking guys I think are good relative to their betting odds because I don't want to give out like these are based on betting odds. I don't want to give out bets that I think are bad because my brain doesn't work that way.
Just my brain can't give out anything other than a lock.
Oh my gosh. I don't have time to pull up the thing, but yes,
okay.
You know, it's only good bets and good vibes, baby.
In contention for me was Scotty Scheffler, despite what I said about the putting. I think it's a good number. Or more specifically, my model thinks it's a decent number. I'm going to go with Justin Thomas at 14-1 and Xander Schauffele at 20-1.
I have Scheffler. Scheffler's my other one. Wait, you went with Xander? Not Rory? I think you're going to pick Rory.
What good does having Rory get me?
I don't know, man. So I have Rory and Scheffler.
My path to picking Rory for the purposes of this contest is to say we both absolutely think Rory wins, and then I'm not falling behind for next week.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. So if either JT or Xander wins, you regain the lead. If Rory or Scheffler wins, I pad my lead, but still leave some stuff open for next week.
It would
limit your pool of who you could pick, basically.
Yeah, and then I would need a winner to.
Yeah.
A non-chalk winner.
Your win picks are Justin Thomas at 14-1, Xander Schauffele at 20-1. I've got Rory McIlroy 10-1, and Scotty Scheffler at 14-1. Any final thoughts, Brandon, before we send off the good listeners, the good viewers, to fill out their lineups for this week?
With this field being what it is, you can make the case for a lot of guys. Don't get stuck in the guy who's getting talked up the most. That's not to say don't play Rory at all. But that's also like Rory's the best cash game play, but you don't have to play him in every single one of your tournament lineups. But also don't completely fade him because I don't think he's going to be that popular. So it's a little bit of nuance this week, but that's what makes PGA DFS honestly very fun because it's very different every single week based on the field and how the salaries break out.
Yeah. And like I said, it's a good week to be different without being dumb. I think there are ways you can do that for this week. And you might not even.
You can't always do that with some of these fields. Sometimes you.
Right.
By just differentiating,
you got choices.
Silly. This week, you have choices.
Smart pivots. That's a good spot to be in for us as DFS players. Do not forget to subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. PGA, MLB, UFC, NASCAR, whatever it may be, you can find us there. NFL less than a month away. Haha. Your anxiety is spiking. I can tell, and it's great. Anyway, that's all on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Also, Brandon's betting thoughts in the BMW Championship I almost spilled my coffee. Over on Covering the Spread. Don't talk with your hands on an audio medium when you don't need to. That's me. Anyway, get all that over on Covering the Spread. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your DFS lineups. We'll talk to you once again next week for the Tour Championship. This has been covering... Oops, this is... buddy. It's my third podcast of the day. It's bound to happen eventually. We did it. This has been, I think, the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire, ?